Prologue. Letter 1. Mrs. Seville, England, St. Petersburg, December 11th, 17. My dear Margaret, I arrived here yesterday, and everything is going to plan. All is well. You need not have worried. The weather is cold, but I am enjoying it. I am also greatly looking forward to the voyage. The dangers do not worry me. I have studied all the necessary subjects and worked on many different ships. Now that I have as much money as I need, I can make my dream come true and begin my voyage. In a fortnight's time, I shall arrive in Archangel, where I shall hire a ship and employ as many sailors as necessary. If my voyage is successful, it may be many months, perhaps years, before you and I meet again. Thank you for all your love and kindness. Your loving brother, R. Walton. Letter 2. Mrs. Seville, England, Archangel, March 28, 17. It is very cold here. There is much ice and snow. I have hired a ship and I am now completing my crew. My only sadness is that I do not have a friend to share this adventure with. However, I know my lieutenant to be a brave and good man, and the master of the ship is also a man of good character. He has a gentle manner, and I think I have been lucky to find him. I heard about him from a woman who owes her happiness to him. The story is that a few years ago he loved a young Russian woman. He asked her father if he may marry her, and the father agreed. He spent all his money on a farm where he planned to live with her. However, a few days before the wedding, the young woman told him that she loved another man, but that he was poor, and that her father would not let her marry him. To her surprise, he gave his farm to the man she loved so that she could marry him. He then left the country. The weather this winter has been very bad, but I am hoping that spring will come early so that we can soon begin our voyage. I am very excited, as we shall be going to places where no man has ever been before. There will be dangers, but you can be sure I shall not do anything foolish. Please write to me as often as you can. Your letters are important to me. Your loving brother, Robert Walton. Letter 3. Mrs. Seville, England, July 7th, 17. My dear sister, I write to tell you that all is well. The weather is much warmer. We have had a few problems with the ship, but nothing important. I shall be happy if nothing worse happens during the voyage. I am sure I shall be successful. Take care, my dearest sister. Your loving brother, R.W. Letter 4. Mrs. Seville, England, August 5th, 17. Something very strange has happened. Last Monday there was ice all around the ship, and there was thick fog. To our surprise, because we were many miles from anywhere, we saw in the distance a sled pulled across the ice by dogs. There was a very large man sitting on the sled. He was soon out of sight. During the night, while I slept, the ice broke, and the next morning we were able to continue our voyage. When I woke up, I heard the sailors shouting. I went to see what was happening. I looked over the side of the ship and saw a man on a sled like the one we had seen the night before. This sled had only one dog, however. The man looked up at me and shouted, "Where are you going?" I told him we were hoping to get to the North Pole. A sailor helped the man onto the ship. He was very thin and weak and had to be carried to a cabin. We gave him brandy and made him warm. He slept for 2 days. On the third day, I was able to ask him some questions. "What were you doing in the ice?" I asked him. "I am looking for a man who ran away from me," he said. "Was this man also traveling on a sled?" I asked. "Yes." "Then I think we saw him yesterday," I said. "Do you think he may have gotten away before the ice broke?" he asked me next. I told him that I thought this was probable. It was some time before the stranger was well again. He was a very quiet man who spoke only to me. There is a great sadness in him, though, and I am sure something bad has happened in his life. But I enjoy his company and believe I may have a friend at last. Your loving brother, R.W. Letter 5. Mrs. Seville, England, August 13th, 17. I like my guest more and more every day. I wish he were not so sad. I do not know why he is like this. He is so gentle, and yet so wise and well-educated. His health is much better now, and he takes an interest in everything about him. There are times when I think he wants to talk about himself, but he always stops himself. He has said only that he has lost everything and cannot begin again. I know that you would like him if you met him. I believe he is an extraordinary man in so many ways. Your loving brother, R.W. Letter 6. Mrs. Seville, England, August 19, 17. Yesterday the stranger said to me, "I am sure you often ask yourself why I am so unhappy. You must wonder what has happened in my life to make me so. Perhaps you will allow me to tell you something of my past." "I would very much like to know," I replied, "but not if telling me will make you unhappy." "Nothing can make me any more unhappy," he said. "I am searching for one thing only. Tomorrow, when you have time to listen, I will tell you my story. I have decided to make notes as he talks. I am sure his story will be of very great interest. The following is as near to what he said as my notes allow. Your loving brother, R.W. Chapter 1. Frankenstein's Childhood. This is the story the stranger told Walton. My family name is Frankenstein. I am a Genevese, and my family is one of the most important in that country. My father held many important positions in the government. He did not marry or have a family until he was quite old. The woman he married, Caroline Beaufort, was the daughter of an old friend who had lost all his money. She was much younger than my father. He loved her very much. She was not strong, and he did everything he could to take care of her. Shortly after their marriage, they went on a journey. From Italy, they visited Germany and France. I, their eldest child, was born in Naples. For several years, I was their only child. They loved me greatly. My mother, however, wanted to have a daughter as well as a son. One day, when I was about 5 years old, my mother was walking near Lake Como. She came to a small cottage. A poor family lived in it. There were 5 young children. One of them looked different from the others. She had golden hair and blue eyes. They all had dark hair and dark eyes. She was a very pretty child. My mother asked about her. The woman explained that the child was not hers. She was an orphan. Her father had gotten into serious trouble of some kind and had gone to prison in Austria. My mother took the child and asked my father if he would allow her to live with us. He agreed. The child's name was Elizabeth Lavenza. My mother said, "I am giving you Elizabeth as a present, Victor." She became my playmate. There was only a year's difference in our ages. I grew to love her, and I knew that I would love her until I died. I believed that she was mine and only mine. We spent our childhood together. I read widely, wanting to learn about everything. Elizabeth, however, was more interested in art and poetry and the beauty of the countryside where we lived. My parents traveled during the first 7 years of my life, but when my mother had a second child, a boy, they stopped traveling. I was sent to school. There, I made friends with a boy of my own age, Henry Clerval. He liked to write plays and songs, act, and sing. He read books about famous men and women of the past. He was very romantic. His interests were nearer to those of Elizabeth than to mine. It was his ambition to do well in the world. I was more interested in science and trying to understand the mysteries of life and death. My ambition was to learn as much as I could. Whereas Henry and Elizabeth were both gentle, quiet children, I was often bad-tempered and angry, even though I had nothing to be angry about. I had a perfect childhood in every way. When I was 13 years of age, we all went on a visit to Thonon. The weather was so bad that we had to stay indoors in the inn. Looking for something to read, I found a book by Cornelius Agrippa. I was so excited by its contents that I told my father. "My dear Victor," he said, "do not waste your time upon nonsense." If my father had explained then why Agrippa's ideas were nonsense, I would not have read the book. But he did not, and I read the book with great interest. When we got back home, I bought everything Agrippa had written, as well as books by Paracelsus and Albertus Magnus. I became very interested in the search for a chemical that could turn any metal into gold and for whatever it was that gave us life and left us when we died. I was also very interested in ghosts and devils. When I was about 15 years old, there was a bad storm. Lightning struck a tree near our house. It turned the tree into thin pieces of wood. It completely destroyed the tree. Until this time, I had not studied electricity, but now I lost interest in everything else. My new interest was to lead to my own destruction. Chapter 2. The Monster. From this time, science, especially chemistry and electricity, was my main interest. I read widely, attended the lectures, and got to know many of the teachers. I spent a lot of time in the laboratory. Professor Waldman became a good friend, and he helped me very much in my studies. At the end of 2 years, I even made 2 scientific discoveries. I planned to return to my hometown, but something happened to make me change my plans. A subject I studied in great detail was the human body. I wanted to know what caused life and what caused death. Night and day, I studied dead bodies until, at last, I believed I had found the answer. I know that you want me to share this secret with you, but I'm afraid that if I do so, it will make you unhappy. It could be the cause of your own destruction. I ask you, therefore, to listen to my complete story before I tell you the secret that I discovered. I thought about my discovery for a long time before I did anything about it. Then, finally, I decided to use my knowledge. I set about creating a human being. The summer months passed while I worked day and night in a small room at the top of the house where I was living. I worked so hard and for so many hours that I became quite ill. I spent no time with other students. I even forgot to write to my father, who became worried by my silence. I was so afraid that I would fail that I could think only of my work. It was 1 o'clock in the morning when I at last succeeded in creating life. As I looked at the lifeless human being, I saw one eye slowly open. Then he began to breathe and move his arms. At first, I thought he would be a fine-looking man. He had yellow skin, black hair, and very white teeth. Unfortunately, his eyes were watery, and his lips were thin and colorless. I soon realized that there was nothing beautiful about him. I ran out of the room, disgusted by the creature I had created. I tried to sleep, but for hours I could not. Then, when I did get to sleep, I had bad dreams. When I awoke the next morning, I did not want to return to my laboratory and the monster I had created. I went for a long walk until I came to an inn. There, to my pleasure and surprise, I found my friend Henry Clerval. "Tell me about my family," I asked him. "And Elizabeth, how is she?" "They are all well, Frankenstein," he said. "But you do not look well, my friend. Your eyes look as if you have not slept for many weeks." I knew this was true. "I have been so busy," I explained, "that I have been working without rest." Henry walked back with me to my apartment. I did not want him to, but I could not stop him. I was afraid that the creature I had left there might be alive and walking about. When we reached my apartment, I asked Henry to wait outside for a few moments. I did not explain why. I slowly opened the door and entered the room. To my surprise, it was empty. The creature had gone. I was so overcome by emotion that I fainted. I was ill for many months. During my illness, Henry was my only nurse. He heard me talking in my sleep about a monster. At first, he thought I was just having a bad dream, but then he realized that something very bad had happened in my life. At last, I began to get better. I thanked Henry for all his kindness in looking after me. "It has been nothing," he said. "And now you must write to your family and Elizabeth. They are worrying about you." He handed me a letter. "This came for you a few days ago. I believe it is from Elizabeth." The letter was indeed from her, and it was full of good news from home. Everyone was well, though my brother Ernest was planning to join the army, much against my father's wishes. I wrote immediately to Elizabeth, but told her nothing of my problem. Chapter 3. The Murder of William. As soon as I was better, I introduced Clerval to some of the professors at the university. For myself, I now had no wish to continue with my work. However, one professor made my life difficult by telling Clerval how important my discoveries were. Clerval asked me for details, but I avoided telling him about my creation of life. This was not too difficult, as he had little interest in science. He was more interested in the study of languages such as Persian, Arabic, and Sanskrit, and I spent a happy summer studying them with him. My happiness came to an end when I received a letter from my father. Geneva, May 12, 17. My dear Victor, I have been too sad to write before. I have the worst possible news. Your brother William is dead. He has been murdered. It happened this way. I went for a walk with Elizabeth and your two brothers. The boys walked on ahead. I was tired, so I sat on a seat with Elizabeth to wait for their return. Before long, Ernest came back and asked if we had seen William. The boys had been playing hide-and-seek. Ernest had not been able to find William. We searched until it was dark, and then we returned home, hoping that he might be there. He was not, so we took lights and searched again. About 5 in the morning, we found him. He was dead. The marks of the murderer's fingers were on his neck. William's death has made Elizabeth very ill. She cries for you. Come home, Victor. We need you here. Your loving but sad father, Alphonse Frankenstein. Clerval, who had watched me read the letter, saw the sadness in my face. My dear Frankenstein, he said, what has happened? I gave him the letter to read. I am so sorry, Clerval said after he read it. What will you do? Go immediately to Geneva, I said. Within the hour, I was on horseback on my way to Geneva. It was completely dark when I arrived. The gates of the town were already shut, and I had to spend the night at a village outside the city. I then had to cross the lake in a boat. During the short voyage, there was a sudden storm with heavy rain, wind, and lightning. When I left the boat, I had to walk through the forest. A flash of lightning suddenly lit up a figure running between the trees. I was sure it was the murderer of my brother William. I began to run after him, but he soon disappeared in the hills. When I came to my home, my brother Ernest ran out to meet me. Welcome, my dearest Victor, he said. I wish you had come 3 months ago. Then you would have found us happy. Now you come to us to share our sadness. I hope you can do something to help our father and Elizabeth. They are ill with grief. Elizabeth also blames herself for the murder. She believes she should never have let William out of her sight. However, the murderer has been found. How can that be? I exclaimed. I was sure I had seen him during the storm. It was Justine Moritz, Ernest said. That cannot be possible, I said. Why would a young girl like Justine kill William? On the day William's body was found, Ernest explained, Justine suddenly became ill. She had to stay in bed for several days. One of the servants in her home took her clothes to be washed. These were the clothes she had worn on the night of the murder. The servant found in one of the pockets a picture in a silver frame of our mother. The servant took the picture to the police. They questioned Justine. She was unable to explain how the picture got into her pocket. She is now in prison. This was a strange story that I knew could not be true. You are all wrong, I said. I have seen the murderer running in the forest. Justine, poor, good Justine, is innocent. At that moment, my father came into the room. Father, Ernest exclaimed, Victor says that he knows who the murderer of poor William is. Justine is innocent. Her trial is today, my father said. If she is innocent, we must hope she will not be found guilty. Elizabeth now joined us. We are twice sad, she said. William was our brother. Justine was our friend. I repeated my belief that the girl was innocent. We can hope only that there will be justice, my father said. Chapter 4. The Trial. My family had to go to the court as witnesses. Justine was quiet and looked both brave and innocent. There was unfortunately some strange evidence against her. She had been out during the night of the murder. In the morning, a woman had seen her near where the body of William was found. She had explained to the woman that she had been out all night and had been seen near the area where William was found dead. Later, when shown William's body, she had fainted and had had to stay in bed for several days. A witness then gave evidence that a few hours before William went missing, Justine had put the silver picture of our mother around his neck. When Justine came to tell her story, she said, "God knows that I am innocent. I can only say what happened and hope that the court will believe me. I spent the night of the murder with an aunt at Chain, a village near here. Early the next morning, on my way home, I met a man who asked me if I had seen William, who was lost. The gates of the city were still shut for the night, so I slept for a short time in a hut outside the gates. I then decided to join the search for William. I did not know that I had already been near where his body was later found." Elizabeth then spoke to the court. "I have lived with the parents of the child who was murdered, even before his birth. I know the accused well. She worked for the Frankenstein family. She nursed Madame Frankenstein in her last illness. I know her to be a kind and good young woman who loved the child William and who is like a mother to him. I cannot believe she is guilty of this crime." More witnesses spoke, and then the judge said he would give his verdict in the morning. The next morning, after a sleepless night, I went to the court. To my surprise, the judge said that Justine had confessed to the murder. I found this impossible to believe. If she were guilty, then I would have been angry. I was sure that the figure I had seen had to have been the murderer. If he were not, then why had he run away? When I told Elizabeth about Justine's confession, she was very sad. "I shall never believe in human goodness again," she said. "Justine was a friend. How could she do such a thing?" When we received a message that Justine wished to see Elizabeth, my father did not want her to go. "I will see her," Elizabeth said. "Victor will come with me." Justine was in prison. When we went into her cell, she threw herself at Elizabeth's feet and cried. Elizabeth began to cry too. "Surely you cannot believe," Justine said, "that I did this terrible crime." "I did not believe it," Elizabeth replied, "until you confessed to the murder." "I did confess, but I confessed a lie," Justine said. "The priest told me that I would go to hell if I died without confessing. He told me that I would be thrown out of the church. He said that if I confessed, God would forgive me. Elizabeth, I did not know what I was saying. I was so frightened and confused." "Oh, Justine," Elizabeth said, "I believe you. I will do everything I can to prove your innocence." Justine looked up at me. "And you, Victor? I hope you do not believe that I am guilty." Before I could answer, Elizabeth said, "He believes strongly in your innocence and has always done so." We both went to the judge and asked him to change his verdict, but he would not. The next day, Justine was executed. I was sure that my creation in the laboratory was the murderer, but I could not prove it. Chapter 5. The Monster Tells His Story. Victor Frankenstein continued his story. "I felt so guilty that I could not sleep. My creation of life had been a terrible mistake. Not only was Justine dead, killed for a crime she was innocent of, but so was my youngest brother. I was to blame for both deaths. I had created the monster that was the murderer, and the creature was still out there somewhere. My father became very ill. Grief at the deaths of William and Justine overcame him. I, too, was in the deepest pain. Many times I thought about killing myself as I sailed alone each day on the lake. Elizabeth, seeing how unhappy I was, tried to help me. "You have friends who love you, Victor," she said. "Try not to grieve too much." The time came when I could not stay at home any longer. I had to get away. I decided to ride into the hills. Ahead of me was snow-covered Mount Blanc. After many days, I arrived at a mountain village. Very tired after many days traveling, I was at last able to sleep. The next day, feeling much stronger, I decided to climb to the top of the mountain with my horse. There was heavy wind and rain, but I did not care. I began my climb without a guide. It was nearly midday when I arrived at the top of the mountain. For some time I stood there looking at the sea of ice. Then I began to cross it. The journey, which was very difficult, took me 2 hours. Suddenly, a man ran out of the mist toward me. It was the monster I had created. "You want to kill me?" he said. You want to kill that which you have created? You have no right to do so. Leave me in peace, or one by one I shall kill everyone you love." I was so angry that I leapt at him, wanting to kill him there and then, but he easily stepped aside, and I fell to the ground. "It will be so easy for me to kill you," he said. "But now I will not. You are my creator. You have made me larger and stronger than any other man, but I am unhappy. Why? Because I am different from all other men. No one wants to be near me. I am hated by all who see me. Think what that is like. If you want me to leave you alone, then do what you can, Frankenstein, to make me happy." "How can you ask such a thing of me?" I demanded. "You are evil." "No, let me tell you what has happened to me. I ask only that you listen to me. I have a right to ask my Creator to do that. Come with me. Here is not the place for me to tell my story." He turned and walked away. I decided that I should hear his story, so I followed him. He led the way to a cave, and there lit a fire. I sat beside it as he began his story. "It is with difficulty," he began, "that I remember my first days of life. I was confused. There were so many different sights, sounds, and smells. Before long, I realized that I could stand, that I could walk, and that I could leave the place where I was born. Some time later, I found myself in a forest. I lay down by a stream and slept. When I awoke, I found some berries to eat. I drank from a nearby river. It was dark. I felt cold and frightened. Before I had left your apartment, feeling cold, I had covered myself with some clothes, but they were not enough to keep me warm during the night. Feeling pain all over my body, I sat down and cried. After a while, I came to understand where I was. There was the moon at night and the sun during the day. There were birds and small animals in the forest. There was water to drink. I found different things to eat. One day I found a fire, which had been left by a traveler. I touched it, and it burned me. Then I learned how to use it and keep it alight. After that, I was able to keep warm during the cold nights. My days were spent looking for food. One day, I left the forest and went to a small shepherd's hut. I went into the hut. There was an old man inside sitting by the fire. Hearing me, he turned. When he saw me, he shouted out in fear. He ran out of the hut as fast as he could. I quickly ate what he had left of his breakfast. Then, too tired to go further, I lay down and went to sleep. It was midday when I awoke. I left the hut and walked toward what I discovered was a village. I was excited, for the gardens were full of things I thought I could eat. Then the people of the village saw me. They shouted and screamed and threw things at me. I ran away from them. I ran back into the hills until I found another hut. It was at the back of a cottage. I decided that this hut was where I would make my home. A short time after this, I heard footsteps. I looked out of my hut. A young girl was walking toward the cottage. A young man was coming toward her. They went into the cottage. A little later, the young man came out of the cottage and walked away. I decided to look into the cottage. I walked silently to a window and looked inside. There was an old man in the cottage. The young girl was sitting near, singing to him. Her voice was beautiful. I listened for a while, but the music began to make me feel sad, so I went back into the hut. Soon after this, the young man returned. He was carrying wood for the fire. It began to get dark, and I returned to the hut. Chapter 6. The Monster Learns. The monster continued his story. I tried to sleep, but could not. I wanted to be with the people in the hut. The next day, I watched the young man and the young woman at work. I watched them take care of the old man with love. I wondered why they did this. I saw that they were not completely happy. From time to time, one of them would move away and start to cry. I saw, too, that they were often hungry. They had only a few vegetables to eat. They always gave what food they had to the old man first. They were so kind to him. that I decided not to steal more of their food. Instead, I went into the forest during the night and ate berries and nuts. I also brought wood back to the hut. The young couple were very surprised to find it there in the morning. Then I discovered something very important about the young couple. They made sounds with their mouths, and these sounds meant something. In this way, they were able to tell one another things. Everything had a name, and by listening and looking, I found out the names of many things. I soon knew the sounds for fire, milk, bread, and wood. The word for the young man was Felix. For the young woman, it was Agatha. And for the old man, it was father. Another interesting discovery was that the young man looked at an object in his hand and made sounds as he did so. I learned later that that object was a book and that he was reading from it. I spent the winter watching the small family and learning many things just by watching and listening. When I was not watching and listening, I slept. At night, I went into the forest for food. Many months passed this way, and soon the warmer weather came. Now the old man left the cottage and walked a few steps every day with the help of a stick. As each day passed, I wanted more and more to become a part of this family. I had learned the meaning of the word good, and these three human beings were good. I wanted to be with them. I wanted to use the words I had learned. I began to have hope for my future. Then, one day in the spring, a woman rode up to the cottage. Felix came out to meet her. He seemed to be very pleased to see her. She held out her hand, and he kissed it. Then she got off her horse and followed him into the cottage. There she spoke to the old man, but the sounds she made were different from those I had heard. It soon became clear to me that although the old man understood these sounds, Agatha and Felix did not. Agatha and the woman, whose name I believe was something like Safi, went to bed early. Felix stayed up late talking to the old man. Safi stayed in the cottage. She tried to learn words from Agatha and Felix, but found it difficult to do so. I learned far quicker than she did. I also began to teach myself how to read and write by listening to the lessons that Agatha and Felix gave to Safi, and by listening to Felix reading to the old man. I learned much about human history and about the different nations and peoples. I learned how some people were good, but that many were bad. They were so bad that they killed other people and stole from them. Most surprising was that people who owned many things were believed to be important, whereas people who did not own things were believed to be of little value. This meant that I was of little value, for I owned nothing. I did not even have a family, and as a person, I had no history. Slowly, however, I learned much about the history of the old man. His name was de Lacy. He came from a good family in France, where he had lived for many years. Felix was his son and Agatha was his daughter. They had lived in a large house and been important people. Then a friend of the family, a Turkish merchant, Safi's father, got into trouble with the French government and was sent to prison. Safi came from Constantinople to visit her father. Felix decided to help her father to escape. As the days passed and Felix planned the escape, he fell in love with Safi. She liked the idea of living in France, where women were the equals of men, and was happy to marry him. Her father, however, did not like this idea, but he did not say anything because he did not want to hurt Felix before the escape. The escape plan was successful. Felix and the Turk got away. De Lacy and Agatha did not. They were put into prison. Felix returned to Paris and tried to get his father and sister out of prison. Then the government let them out of prison, but took everything they owned. De Lacy expected that the Turk, who was rich, would help them, but he did not. He returned to Turkey, taking Safi with him. De Lacy, Agatha, and Felix now had no money. They had to leave France and live in the cottage in Germany, where I found them. When Safi found out what had happened to them and how her father had been so unkind to them, she decided to try and find them. Taking her jewels with her and a servant who understood German and Turkish, she left her home. She arrived safely in a town about 20 kilometers from the cottage. There, her servant fell ill and died. Safi was now alone in a country whose language she could not speak. By luck, she met an Italian with whom she could speak, and he knew where De Lacy, Agatha, and Felix could be found. Chapter 7. The Monster Tries to Make Friends. The monster continued to speak. I learned from these people what good behavior is and what is bad. I had no wish to behave badly. Then, one night, when I was collecting wood in the forest, I found a bag. Inside the bag, there were books that I was able to read. From then on, I spent my days reading. Some of the things that I read made me happy. Some made me sad, and some made me very angry. Some made me ask questions about myself, such as, who am I? Where have I come from? Why am I here? And what should I do with my life? I learned much about the history of human beings, of the wars, and of the very bad things that some people have done. I read about God and what different people believed. I began to have many strange thoughts about myself and my life, and then I remembered some papers I had taken from your laboratory. They were in the pocket of my coat. I am sure you remember writing them. They told how you had created me, and that I am an ugly form of life, a monster. Can you imagine what I felt as I read these words? I knew that I was alone in the world, and always would be. No one would want to be my friend. I would be hated. My unhappiness was made worse by what I saw as greater happiness in the cottage. De Lacy, Agatha, Felix, and Safie were poor, but they were very happy together. There was much laughter and singing. They loved one another. As the months passed, I wondered if perhaps they would accept me if I showed myself. I believed them to be kind and generous. One day, when De Lacy was alone in the cottage, I decided to show myself to him. Nervously, I walked toward the cottage and knocked on the door. "Who is there?" said the old man. "Come in." I went inside. "I am sorry to trouble you," I said, "but I am a traveler, wanting a place to rest. May I stay a few minutes by your fire?" "Please come in and sit down," he said. "My children are not here, and I am blind, so I cannot get food for you." "I don't need food," I said. "I only need rest." "By your language, stranger," the old man said, "I think you are my countrymen. Are you French?" "No," I replied, "but I was educated by a French family and understand that language only. Now I am on my way to visit some people who may help me. I am friendless and alone in the world." "Are they Germans?" he asked. "No, they are French. The people I am on my way to visit know little about me." "It is not good to be without friends," the old man said. "Perhaps these people you speak of will become your friends." "I know that they are kind," I said, "but they will see me as a monster. Somehow, I must make them believe that although they may see me as ugly, I will not hurt them." "Where do these people live?" "Near here." The old man was silent for a moment. Then he said, "If you will tell me your story, I may be able to help you. Although I am blind, I can learn a lot from what a person tells me. I would like to help you if I can." I believed that now was the time to speak the truth about myself. I took hold of the old man's hand. "You can save me. You and your family are the people I want to meet." At that moment, the cottage door was open, and Felix, Safie, and Agatha came in. As soon as they saw me, Agatha fainted. Safie ran out of the cottage. Felix ran forward and pulled me away from his father. He threw me to the ground and began hitting me with a stick. At last, I got to my feet and ran from the cottage. I was so angry that I felt like destroying the cottage and everyone inside, but I did not. Instead, I ran into the forest and continued running until I could run no more. I lay down to rest and stayed where I was until the next morning. Then, after finding something to eat, I went back to my hut. I realized that what had happened was probably my fault. Sometime later that day, 2 men came to the cottage. Felix came out and spoke to them. "We must leave this cottage immediately," he said. "After what has happened, we cannot stay here. My sister and our friend are too afraid. My father's life is in danger. I am sure of it." Soon after this, The DeLacy family left the cottage and took with them the few things that they owned. I was overcome with sadness for the family and then with anger at the way they had behaved toward me. That night, I set fire to the cottage and burned it to the ground. Now I had to decide what to do and where to go. I knew only that I should travel toward the southwest. For many weeks I traveled, walking at night, sleeping by day. I was seen by no one. Then one day, as I was sitting by a river, a young girl ran toward it. Quickly I hid behind a tree. As she ran along the riverside, her foot slipped and she fell into the water. She could not swim. Neither could I, but I was tall enough to stand in the river. I jumped in and pulled the child to safety. As I did so, a man came out of the forest. Seeing me, he lifted his gun and fired at me. I fell to the ground. The man ran off, pulling the child after him. I had saved the child's life, but that had not stopped the man from trying to kill me. I lay where I was for a long time, badly hurt. Slowly my wound got better, and I was able to continue my journey. At last I came to Geneva. I hid just outside the city. Soon after I was in my hiding place, a young boy walked by. If I could make this young boy my friend, I thought, I would be happy. As he came near, I came out of my hiding place and took hold of his arm. "Let me go, monster," he shouted. "I know you want to eat me. Let me go, or I will tell my father, and he will send the soldiers to catch you." "Boy, you will never see your father again," I said. "You must come with me." The boy shouted and screamed. To make him quiet, I put my hands around his neck. I did not mean to kill him, but within seconds, he was dead. Chapter 8. The Monster Wants a Wife. I looked down at the dead boy, and I was happy. The monster continued. I knew that I could kill my enemies. As I looked at the boy, I saw something around his neck. It was a picture of a beautiful woman. Looking at her and knowing that I would never enjoy the love of a woman such as her, I became very angry. I walked away from the dead boy. Soon I came to a hut. I looked inside. A girl was sleeping there. I bent over her. "Wake up," I said. She moved but did not wake. I put the picture of the woman under her dress and left the hut. I thought that the boy I had killed was the beautiful woman's son. I knew that seeing his picture beneath her dress would make her very sad, and I was glad. I wanted to hurt any of these people who caused me so much pain. For many months, I have walked these mountains looking for you. Only you can help me. Only you can take away my pain. I am so lonely, so friendless. You must create a friend for me, someone like me, a female monster like me, with whom I can live. This was the end of his story. "Do whatever you wish," I replied angrily. "Nothing you can say or do will make me create another monster. You are evil." "It is you who are in the wrong," he said. "I do bad things because I am so unhappy. If I cannot have someone to love me, then I will make everyone afraid of me. Why can't you understand this? Give me a female to love, and be loved by me, and I shall be happy. I shall not kill again. I shall go away with this female creature, and we will live together in the jungles of South America. No one will ever see us again." "I don't understand you," I said. "One moment you say that you are angry because people do not want to have anything to do with you. The next moment you are saying that you will go away and live in the jungle, far away from people." "I will not argue with you," he said. "Create a woman, and I will go away with her forever. Do not, and you and all your kind will pay. Think about what I have said. I will leave you now, but I shall return." With these words, he walked away and left me to my thoughts. It had taken him all day to tell his story, and now night was falling. I returned to my home and my own family. I looked ill, and they asked me what was wrong. I could not tell them. I knew that to save them, I had to do as the monster demanded. I had to create a female for him. I wanted to begin immediately, but weeks passed before I could find the courage. I knew that I had to do more studying before I could create a female. As the weeks passed, I was able to stop thinking about it. There were days when I even forgot about the monster. My family and friends saw that I was happier. My father was pleased by the change in me. One day he said, Victor, I know how much you care for Elizabeth. Is it as a sister you have feelings for her, or have you ever thought about asking her to be your wife? Father, I replied, it is my greatest hope that Elizabeth will one day be my wife. Then why can you not be married immediately? Why wait? I knew I did not want to wait, but there was still something I had to do before I could marry Elizabeth, before I could have a happy life. I knew that I had to go to England to continue my studies. Only there would I learn what I needed to know to create a female. Before I can marry, I said, I must go to England and complete my studies. My father agreed, and as I found out later, after talking to Elizabeth, he asked Clerval to join me on my journey. This pleased me because I did not want to spend much time alone. It was agreed that on my return from England, Elizabeth and I would marry. My worry now was that while I was away, the monster might hurt my family. However, I told myself that he would probably follow me to England, and that he would do nothing unless he believed I was never going to create a female for him. Clerval was waiting for me in Strasbourg, and from there we traveled together to England. We soon found a place to stay in London, and for the next few months, I was busy visiting people who could give me the information that would enable me to create a female. Clerval had his own interest. I wished that they were also mine, but they were not. His plan was to visit India, and he studied everything he could about this country. In February, I received a letter from a man who had visited my family in Geneva. He lived in Scotland and invited me to visit him there. I did not wish to go, but Clerval wanted to, and so I agreed. I packed up my chemicals and instruments, and we left London on the 27th of March. On our way to Scotland, we spent a few days in Oxford, a city which I liked very much, and stopped many times on our way to look at interesting places. By the time we arrived, I had been away from Geneva for many months. I was afraid that the monster would think I had forgotten my promise to him, and that in anger he would again murder. After we arrived in Scotland, and we had spent a few days with my friends, I told Clerval that I now wished to continue north alone. Stay here with my friends until I return, I said. They are pleased to have you as a guest. I would rather travel with you, Clerval said. I explained that I needed some time on my own, and that I would be with him at a later date. I set off to find as lonely a place as possible, where I could continue with my work. In the far north of Scotland, there are islands, some of which are called the Orkneys. They were the perfect places for me to create a female for the monster. Chapter 9. A Promise is Broken. On the whole island, there were only 3 small huts, and one of these was empty when I arrived. There were holes in the roof, and the windows were broken, but I had them mended and moved in. No one came to visit me, and I was able to spend my days working, even though I hated what I was doing, and there were days when I could not continue. However, I made good progress, and I knew that soon I would have created a female. The monster had promised that if I made a female for him, he would go and live with her in the jungle and never kill again. But I did not know what the female would be like. It was possible that she would be worse than the monster I had already created. There was also the possibility that she would hate him. Then what would happen? I asked myself. Suddenly, as I sat thinking, I heard a noise outside. I looked out of the window and saw to my horror the face of my monster. He had followed me. He had come to make me keep my promise. Looking at him, I knew now I could not. I knew that whatever happened, I must not create another monster. I set about destroying my work. Through the window, the monster saw me do this. He pushed open the door. "What are you doing?" he shouted at me. "Why have you broken your promise? I have suffered hunger and cold for months as I have followed you. Why are you now destroying all my hopes? You have created me, but I am your master. You will obey me and keep your promise." "No," I replied. "I will not create another monster. Nothing you can say or do will make me change this decision. Now go." He was silent for a moment. Then he said, "I will go now, but I shall be with you on your wedding night." With these words, he left the hut and ran down to the water. where he got into a boat. I stood at the door of my hut, knowing it was useless to follow him. I had made my decision, and he had made his. I was sure he would kill me on my wedding night. Would that be the end of his anger? I asked myself. Or would he kill Elizabeth also if I married her? I passed a sleepless night. In the morning, I walked about the island until I was so tired that when I lay down I could sleep. Several hours later, I returned to my hut. There was a letter waiting for me from Clerval. He told me that he planned to leave for India very soon, but wanted to spend some time with me before he left. I looked at the half-completed female monster on the floor. I decided to bury her near the sea. Then I packed up my chemicals and instruments. I decided to take them away with me, even though I did not plan to continue my work. The next morning, I put everything in a small boat and began my journey away from the island. At first, the weather was fine, but toward noon a strong wind began to blow. The boat began to fill with water. I did not know where the wind was blowing me or how long it would be before the boat sank. Then the wind changed, and within an hour I saw land. I was able to steer the boat to the land where there was a small town. I pulled my boat out of the water and began to repair the sail. As I was working, some men came up to me. "Can you tell me, friends," I asked, "the name of this town?" "You will soon find out," one of the men said rudely. "What is the matter?" I asked. "Why are you so rude to me?" "Because you are English, and we are Irish, and we do not like the English," he replied. "Come with us to Mr. Kirwin, the judge. He will know what to do with you." "Why must I go before a judge?" I demanded. "Because a man was murdered here last night," the man said. "The judge will want to know everything about you." I knew I was innocent, and so I followed the man to the judge's house without argument. One of the men told the judge that he had been out fishing during the night. Because of the sudden wind, he had to land away from the town. He had been walking along the shore in the dark when his foot hit something, and he fell to the ground. When other fishermen came to help him to his feet, they saw that he had fallen over the body of a man who was about 25 years of age. He was dead. His neck had been broken. There were the marks of a man's hand on his neck. Another man now spoke. He told the judge that a few minutes before the fishermen had shouted for help. He had seen a small boat moving out to sea, with what looked like a man in it. Other men then said that they were sure my boat was the same boat their friend had seen. The judge, Mr. Kirwin, then said that he wanted me to see the body of the dead man, and I was taken to where he was being kept. The dead man was Clerval. I was so shocked that I fell to the ground and lost consciousness. I was ill in prison for almost 2 months. A woman looked after me. She was not kind, but she did what had to be done. One day she said, "Are you feeling better?" I replied, "I think I am, but if I am not living a dream, then I would be better off dead." "You are right to think that way. You are a murderer and have no future, but you have been lucky so far. Mr. Kirwin is a good man, and he has given you the best room in the prison. I do not know why. Perhaps he believes you did not kill that man." Soon after this, Mr. Kirwin came to see me. He spoke to me in French. "This is not a good place for you, I know," he said. "Is there anything you need?" I could not think of anything. I was still too ill to care. Then Mr. Kirwin said, "I am hoping that soon someone will come and prove that you did not kill that man. It was just an accident that your boat was seen at the time." He seemed to believe that I was innocent, and I did not know why. Did he, I wondered, have some information that I knew nothing about? "Immediately, you became ill," he said. "I found several letters to you. They had addresses. I wrote to them in Geneva. Soon, someone will come to visit you." For a moment, I thought that my visitor might be the monster. "No, no," I shouted. "Do not let him near me." "What are you saying?" Mr. Kirwin demanded. "It is your father who has come to see you." "My father? Oh, but how kind, how very kind. But where is he? Why isn't he here now?" At this moment, my father entered the room. "Father," I cried, "you are safe, and Elizabeth and Ernest, are they safe?" "Yes, they are safe," he said. "But poor Clerval, to be killed like that. Who could have done it, and why?" I could not tell my father what I knew. My guilt was too great. Soon after his arrival, however, I was able to prove that I was still on the Orkney Islands when Clerval was murdered, and I was set free. I knew that I had to return to Geneva and protect Elizabeth from the monster. Chapter 10. Going Home. I was too ill to complete the journey without a rest, so we stayed in Paris for a time. I was overcome by guilt and could not stop blaming myself for what had happened. "I am to blame, father," I said. "William, Justine, and Henry Clerval all died because of me." "How can that be?" my father argued. "You were nowhere near them when they were killed." "But I am to blame. It is because of me that they died," I repeated. My father did not believe me, and I could not bring myself to tell him about the monster I had created. He thought that my illness had made me mad. A few days before we left Paris, on our way to Switzerland, I received the following letter from Elizabeth. Geneva, May 18th, 17. My dear friend, it gave me the greatest pleasure to receive a letter from Paris and to know that you are nearly home. Before you arrive, there is something I must say to you. I have not written about it before, because you have had such a difficult time, but I cannot wait any longer. As you know, Victor, for many years it has been your parents' wish that we should one day marry. We have always been friends, and our love for one another has been that of brother and sister. If we are to marry, that love must change, and I worry, Victor, that perhaps you love another in that way. I must know the truth of your feelings. I know you have been very unhappy for some time, and I worry that it is because you believe you have a duty to marry me, even though you love another. My love for you is such that I want you to be happy more than anything. Your loving friend, Elizabeth. I read and reread the letter. My only wish was to marry Elizabeth. She was the only woman I loved. But at the back of my mind were the monster's words, "I will be with you on your wedding night." I knew that by this, the monster meant that he planned to kill Elizabeth. I believed that she was in danger whether or not I married her. I believed, therefore, that I should not delay the marriage. It would make her, my father, and me happy. I decided that after the wedding, I would tell her about the monster and what I had done. I could not keep the secret from my wife. This was a portion of my reply to her. "I am afraid, dearest Elizabeth, that there will be little happiness for me in this life, but all that I will enjoy will be because of my love for you. You alone are the woman I love. I do have, however, a terrible secret. This I will tell you about on the day after our marriage. You will then understand how difficult and painful the last months have been for me. Please do not tell anyone that I have such a secret." A week later, I arrived in Geneva. Elizabeth was as saddened by my looks as I was by hers, for she was much thinner, but in every other way, she was the same Elizabeth I had left behind. Soon after my arrival, my father spoke of my immediate marriage to Elizabeth. I remained silent. "Do you then love another?" "I love Elizabeth and look forward to our marriage. Decide on the date. I will give my life for her happiness." "My dear Victor, do not speak this way. We have had very bad luck, but we still have the love of those who are important to us. That is what really matters." It was agreed that immediately after our wedding, Elizabeth and I should go to Villa Lavenza and spend our first days of happiness beside the beautiful lake near which it stood. In the meantime, I did everything possible to defend myself against an attack by the monster. I carried a gun and a knife with me everywhere. After the wedding, we went by boat to Evian and then continued our journey overland the next day. This was the time in my life that I felt happy, even though I saw sadness in Elizabeth. She was, I knew, worried about what I had to tell her. "Try to be happy," I said. "This is my only chance of happiness." "Be happy, my dear Victor," replied Elizabeth. "I hope there is nothing worrying you. Let us enjoy this beautiful day together." I tried to put the monster out of my thoughts, but I could not. His words repeated themselves inside my head. "I will be with you on your wedding night." Chapter 11. The Monster's Revenge. We had planned to spend the night at an inn by the lake. From our room, we could see the water and the forest beyond. It was a peaceful scene, but I was not at peace. Elizabeth could see this. "What is the matter, my dear?" she asked me. I pretended that I was just very tired. While she got ready for bed, I made sure my gun was near at hand. "I am going for a walk," I said. "Be sure to lock the door of our room. Open it only to me." I walked along all the corridors of the inn, looking wherever the monster could hide. There was no sign of him. Then suddenly, I heard a scream, and then another one. I ran as fast as I could to our room. The door had been broken open. I ran into the room. Elizabeth lay across the bed. Her head was hanging over the side. I ran to her and lifted her toward me. She was dead. Her neck had been broken. I ran out of the room. I was sure the monster was in the inn. I had to find him. I ran like a wild thing from room to room with my gun in my hand. At first, there was no sign of him. Then I saw his face looking in through a window. It had the ugliest of smiles upon it. I ran to the window, firing my gun. But he ran off and jumped into the lake. I ran out of the inn and found a boat. Other guests from the inn joined me in my search. But we never found him. All that night, tired though I was, I lay awake. I could think only that I had lost the one person in the world who could give me happiness. I could think only that I was to blame for her death because I had created the monster who had killed her. I returned to Geneva, to my father and Ernest. My father was deep in sadness, for Elizabeth had been like a daughter to him. The loss made him ill, and within a month he was dead. He died in my arms. As for me, I became mad and was taken away and locked up until my madness passed. I had one thought and one thought only. I had to find the monster and kill him. However, I knew that I could not do this without help. I went to a magistrate in the town. "I know who killed my wife, my brother, and my friend," I said. "You must help me find him." I then told the magistrate my story. At first, he did not believe me and thought I was mad. But as I gave him more and more information, he changed his mind. "I will find men to help you bring this monster to justice," he said. "But I have to tell you that I do not think we shall be successful. He seems to have powers that ordinary men do not have. He is able to live in the mountains, where there is only ice and snow, and no ordinary man can go. I am afraid you will be disappointed." I knew from this that the magistrate did not plan to really help me. Angrily, I left his house. I knew that I had to find another way of getting to and killing the monster. I decided to leave Geneva and continue my search for the monster until I found him. The night before I planned to leave, I went to the graveyard where my father, William, and Elizabeth were buried. As I stood looking down at their graves, I heard a terrible laugh. Then a voice shouted, "I kept my promise! Now I will let you live with your unhappiness!" It was the monster. I saw a black shape among the trees and ran toward it. But I could not run as fast as he, and he was soon lost to me. From that night to this, I have spent every hour of every day trying to find him. Sometimes I have been so ill that I have not been able to move for days. But as soon as my strength returned, I continued my search. There were times when I found a message from him. It was always the same. "Keep searching for as long as you live. You will never find me." Then one day, I heard that he had been seen by some people living in the far north. He had stolen a sled, dogs, and food and journeyed further north. I knew I had to follow him. I bought a sled and dogs. I loaded it with food. Then I set off after him. I didn't know how many weeks I traveled through the mountains of snow and ice. I know only that the day came when I had no food left. Then, far ahead of me, I saw a sled and dogs, with the figure of a huge man sitting on it. I knew that at last I had caught up with the monster. He and I were now alone on the ice. There was nowhere for him to hide. For 2 days I followed him, and the distance between us became shorter and shorter. Then suddenly the ice broke beneath me, and I was in the sea. I was able to stay on a large piece of ice with the sled and the dogs. But now there was sea between myself and the monster. The days passed and the dogs died. I broke pieces of wood from the sled to make oars, and with these oars I was able to move my piece of ice through the sea. After many days, I met your boat, and you took me on board. There I lay, too tired to move. I believe I will soon die. When I do, who will continue the search for this monster? I ask you, Walton, to do so. You know the whole story. You know what he can and will do. He must be killed before he kills again. Chapter 12. The Monster Returns. Now Walton continues his story. August 26, 17. My dearest sister, a week has passed since I have listened to the strangest story that I, and I am sure you, Margaret, have ever heard. Although Frankenstein has talked of the monster he created most of the time, we have also had many other conversations. He is very clever and well educated, and, I believe, a good man. He made a terrible mistake when he created the monster, but he did not realize what he was doing, and he did not plan to create such an evil creature. He greatly regrets what he has done and how he has also wasted his life. He now wants only to kill the creature. It is what he lives to do. September 2nd, 17. My beloved sister, I don't know if I shall ever see England again. All I can see now is mountains of ice. We are in continuous danger here, and my men look to me for leadership. I know that we must do everything we can to stop Frankenstein's monster from killing again, but we are making no progress. I don't know if we shall ever be free from the ice. September 5th, 17. We are still surrounded by mountains of ice. Our ship still cannot move. It is very cold here and empty of life. Frankenstein is far from well and seems to get worse daily. This morning the men came to me and asked me to promise that when we are free from the ice, I will turn the ship southwards. I told them to be brave and that we must do what we have set out to do. They listened to me, but I do not think they will obey me. September 7th. I have agreed to turn south if we can free the ship from the ice. September 12th. On September 9th, the ice began to move. The men shouted with joy. Frankenstein asked what they were shouting about. They shout, I said, because they will soon return to England. Do you really plan to return? Yes. I cannot withstand their demands. I cannot lead them unwillingly to danger, and I must return. Do so if you will, but I will not. He tried to get out of bed, but fell back. I sent for the ship's doctor. I do not think, the doctor told me, that your friend will live for many more hours. And so it was. Before the end of the day, Frankenstein was dead. A few hours after his death, I heard a sound coming from his cabin. I went to it, and there, to my horror, I saw the monster bending over him. Hearing me enter, he moved to the window. I shouted at him to stay. My creator is dead, he said. I ask him now to forgive me, I said. It would have been better if you had asked that while he lived. Try to understand how I felt, he said. My creator had given me a life that was lonely and unhappy. I had no friend, no one. Is it surprising that I was angry, that I wanted to strike out at all those people in his life who gave him happiness? You know only how he felt. You can have no idea what my life was like. He looked down at Frankenstein's body. There is nothing more for me to do, he said. I shall be a danger to no one in the future. Farewell. He ran to the window of the cabin and climbed out. He jumped on a large piece of ice in the sea and was carried away, lost in darkness and distance.
Playlet. Frankenstein. Victor Frankenstein, a man in his late 20s, is studying. His room is full of books. There is a storm outside. He stands and goes to the window. He looks out. Suddenly, lightning strikes a tree. It catches fire. Frankenstein is surprised. He goes to his desk and makes a note in his notebook. He is tired. He goes to the corner of the room where there is a bed. He lies down and closes his eyes. It is morning. Frankenstein is still asleep, but the sun is shining into his room. There is a knock on the door.
Come in.
Henry Clerval enters. He's about Frankenstein's age, but a much less studious man. Still asleep?
I had a very late night. The storm kept me awake. Lightning struck a tree outside.
I saw. It's surprising what electricity can do. It can kill even the biggest tree.
Perhaps if it can destroy life, it can also create life.
Frankenstein has changed his study into a laboratory. There are a lot of scientific instruments on a table. On another table, there is the body of a huge and very ugly man. It is not moving. A wire, coming from the man's head, goes to the window. There is a wire coming out of the window. It goes to a tree. There are dark clouds. Frankenstein is standing at the window. He is looking at the clouds. Frankenstein is standing near the table looking at the man. Suddenly, electricity runs along the wire into the man's head. There is immediately the sound of thunder. The man opens his eyes. Slowly, he sits up. Frankenstein is excited. He moves away from the man and goes out through the door, locking it after him. The man gets off the table. He moves slowly around the room. He begins breaking things. He breaks down the door and goes out. Frankenstein and Clerval are drinking together.
Come back to my laboratory with me. I want to show you something.
Have you been able to change iron into gold?
Something even more important.
Tell me.
No, you must come and see it.
The two men get up and leave the inn. Frankenstein and Clerval enter. Frankenstein is surprised that the man is gone.
I'm sorry, Clerval. I can't stay now. There is something I must do. I'll see you tomorrow.
He runs out of the laboratory. Frankenstein is looking for the monster he has created. He is unsuccessful. The rain begins to fall. Frankenstein gets very cold and wet. He falls to the ground. Frankenstein is asleep in bed. Henry is sitting beside him. He has been nursing him. Frankenstein wakes up. At last, you are awake. I thought you would never wake up. You have been very ill.
How long have I been ill?
More than a month. He hands Frankenstein a letter. This came for you. Frankenstein opens the letter and reads. The news is very bad.
The letter is from my father. There is bad news. My youngest brother William has been murdered. I must go home at once.
Frankenstein is greeted by his father, his brother Ernest, and his adopted sister Elizabeth.
Victor, my son, thank God you have come home. What has happened is unbelievable.
Justine, my maid, is in prison.
Why?
They say she killed William.
She had a picture of Mother that William usually wore around his neck.
She says she doesn't know how she got it.
She confessed to the murder.
It was a false confession.
There is nothing we can do to help her. She will be executed tomorrow.
Alphonse and William leave. Frankenstein takes Elizabeth's hand.
I am so sad for us all, and you look so white.
I have a secret to tell you, Elizabeth, but I cannot tell you until we are married.
But do you love me, Victor?
I have loved you since we were childhood playmates.
And I have always loved you.
We will marry very soon.
Frankenstein is looking out the open window. He is shouting.
I know it is you, monster. I shall find you.
He gets into bed and closes his eyes. The door of his room opens. The monster enters. Frankenstein hears him and opens his eyes. He tries to get out of bed, but the monster holds him down.
Make a wife for me. Why should you be happy while I have no friend, no wife?
You have killed my brother. Justine will die also because of you.
No, because of you. You created me. Whatever I do, you are to blame.
I will never create a wife for you.
Then I will make you the unhappiest man in the world. I will be with you on your wedding night.
The monster climbs out the window. Frankenstein is riding across the ice on a sled pulled by dogs. In the distance, the monster is also on a dog sled. Suddenly, The ice breaks in front of Frankenstein. He is thrown into the sea. He is able to climb onto a piece of ice. Sailors are pulling Frankenstein on board. He is almost dead. Frankenstein is sitting up in bed. Walton is holding him up. He is dying.
And that is my story, Walton. You have been a good friend to me. Now, before I die, promise me you will find the monster and kill him before he kills again.
I will do my best. Frankenstein dies. Walton is writing at his desk. The monster comes into the room.
Where is Frankenstein? He is dead, just as you will be.
He picks up a gun and points it at the monster. But the monster jumps out of the window. On the ship, Walton watches the monster disappear under the waves.